I grew up in Northamptonshire and I love it here where I am now. But when I got to sort of teenager, particularly when I realised I was gay, I did think that perhaps Kettering in 1978 was not going to be the summit of all I could achieve in life. So I escaped to London, like lots of people, lots of gay people in particular in the 80s, who kind of ran away and life began. So I arrived in London when I was 18, same time as Jimmy Sommerville, who arrived from Glasgow when he was 18, new in town, and sort of made up our own life, really. So you could do that in London. It was accessible then. You could arrive in London with nothing, get a foothold, and make up a new life. I mean, I wish I could claim I'd had a master plan and that it all worked out beautifully, but it wasn't that. I simply fell in with a crowd of people who started doing interesting things, and my main good fortune was knowing Jimmy Sommerville. And as soon as Jimmy opened his mouth and sang, I knew that was something pretty spectacular. Not just because he's a great singer, but because he managed to express through song the aspirations of a whole group of people. I think that was what made him so distinctive and so powerful. And so as soon as I heard that, I remember thinking, this is a good thing to get involved with, and things snowballed from there. But I was the most undeserving pop star in the history of recorded sound. Yeah, Jimmy and I both were runaways to London in the 1980s, so we were living in the same part of London. He was living in a squat just opposite the British Museum, so kind of, location squat. And I was around the corner in King's Cross. And we immediately had this strange rapport, which is odd because we're very different. He came from a very tough working class Glaswegian background. He grew up in a world of sectarian politics. It was just pretty awful. Whereas I came from middle class, middle England public school boys. So we were very dissimilar, but often opposites attract, don't they? So we still do have a rapport. We got on well. And he was just such an exciting, stimulating person to be around. He just made possibilities seem new and fresh. He was good at that. Bronski Beat happened first of all. It was basically, Jimmy got together with two guys who lived in his block. He was living in Camberwell in the Tower block then, Larry and Steve, and they formed a little band for a gay arts festival that was started by Ken Livingstone when he was the leader of the GLC. I think really it's a kind of two fingers to the Tory government over the river in the Houses of Parliament. Happy days. And so they did a gig for that. They called themselves Bronski Beat after the little boy in the Tin Drum, the Volker Schlondorf film, who had a piercingly high voice that changed things. And then Bronski Beat, they did one gig basically at Heaven, and there was a guy from a record company there. The minute he heard it, he realised this was special. Signed them, they had a record out in just a matter of weeks, and it went straight into the top 5. So Bronski Beat went boom, and I can remember I was then living in Kilburn, walking down the road and seeing Jimmy on the front of the NME in a newsagent. My friend, all of a sudden becoming a sort of public property. And that was exciting, and also a little bit kind of envy-making. And then Jimmy asked me to come and play in Bronski Beat, to play saxophone in Bronski Beat, and I did. And then he very quickly decided he wanted to leave Bronski Beat and form a new outfit with me. So we did. So I went into pop music, and I never went up and down the M6 in a van. It was the first ever gig I ever did was the Montreux Pop Festival, as I recall. So I sort of went in at the first class end of the spectrum rather than standard, if you see what I mean. And when we had this kind of our moment of success, quite a long moment of success compared to some bands, and then the tensions that inevitably come along with that began to affect us too. And the fact that we were so different, opposites in a way, which had given such energy to our friendship, also gave energy to us falling apart too. Musical differences in the old cliche. And also wanting to do different things. And also, I got terribly jealous of Jimmy getting all the credit and all the attention because I felt virtuous because I did all the work. I did need to do quite a lot of it too, actually. But that was, I think those relationships between singers and instrumentalists can be quite tricky. The 1980s was a good time to be in a pop band in the sense that you could do creative new things and people would let you do that. And also, it was just so richly rewarded. because people bought records and then CDs. So there was lots of money in the industry, and that was exciting. And also people were just generally excited by pop stars. So the world would very soon start saying yes to you and acquiescing to you. And also if you were a pop star who was trying to stand for something, that felt like quite a vindication. But it's also very corrupting too, because you earn too much money at a time of life when you're really not made for that sort of good fortune. And also it's impossible not in the end to start believing your own publicity. And that takes a little bit of... You get used to it in about 3 days. But getting used to it going away, that takes a bit longer. I kind of crashed out of it, pop music, really. I kind of got to the end of the 80s and realised that my time as a pop star was not going to be very long, and rightly so. And so I took some time off. I thought I'd take a year off and work out what I was going to do. And all I did in the end was to just take drugs and go out. And the first 6 months of that was the most fun I ever had. The second 6 months of that I don't really remember, which is just as well. But it ended up with me kind of crashing and burning in that pop star way. And it was really in the middle of that, dealing with the sort of turbulence. And also HIV and AIDS had come along by now and kind of bashed into the lives of my friends and me in a major way. And I kind of wanted to reflect and to think about things in a new way. And I found I started getting kind of twinges of what I'd felt when I was a boy in the school chapel, which was a good place to be, even though I didn't really understand what was going on. And I thought, ooh, there's something in that I want to connect to again. So I very reluctantly took myself off to church. And the minute I did, I kind of realised it was my natural habitat, and I've stayed in it. I was doing very nicely in London. My job before here was I was a curate in Knightsbridge, SW1, the gritty inner city parish. And I was going to move to a neighbouring parish in the tough, mean streets of Mayfair. But I saw an advert for here in the Church Times. Knew the church, always loved Northamptonshire, come from here. Wanted to see more of my parents who were getting on. And then it just sort of came together, and I thought, well, actually, maybe that's quite a good idea. So I did. I came for an interview. I hadn't really planned to, but I thought it won't hurt. And then they offered me the job, and I found myself accepting it without really thinking. I remember I got back to London. I bumped into a friend of mine who's a priest, a glamorous priest in London. He said, "Oh, I hear you're going to Mayfair." And I said, "No, I'm going to Findon in the Diocese of Peterborough." And he said, "What did the bishop catch you doing?" I mean, I got into broadcasting, really. I just fell into it. Again, another sort of haphazard misstep, really. I was Emma Freud's agony aunt on her show on GLR, which was the BBC London station, which was produced by a young fellow down from Manchester called Chris Evans, whatever became of him. So that was I just sort of fell into that. And I only took that job because they didn't pay me, but they gave me a cab home. And I couldn't drive, so I used to stop at Sainsbury's and do my shopping for the week and get it home, which is why that's responsible for my radio career. But I loved it as soon as I did it. As soon as I found myself at home in a studio, great. And then I moved to Radio 5 when that first started and had all the advantages of getting involved with something new when nobody knows what they're doing. And then Radio 3, a surprise move, did that. And then Radio 4. And just sort of found myself, all of a sudden, I've been doing it for 25 years and loved doing it. And it works for the church. I think the church quite likes the idea of having somebody in a dog collar being on mainstream media. I quite enjoy all those panel shows. Those are terrifying to do, especially when you're surrounded by professional comedians, although putting on a dog collar means you're kind of halfway to a laugh already. The challenge for me is, how do I try to do that, be viable doing that, and at the same time faithful to the tradition I represent. And sometimes I get that right, and sometimes I get it wrong. But I haven't got it wrong enough yet to be defrocked. Fingers crossed. I mean, it was quite a tough decision to come out when I was 16, actually, in 1978. But I sort of had to do it, partly because I couldn't really cope with living without being open about it. I think that was bad. And also I had confidence that people around me would be supportive, and they were. I remember the first one I came out to was my mum, and I played her Tom Robinson, Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay. I think it was 4 times before she said, "Darling, you're trying to tell me something." And then she said, "I'll tell your father." But it was okay. I mean, it can't have been news they wanted to hear, but I never doubted for a second that they loved me and cared about me. So that was fine. And then it was a sort of battle for a while, but it was a battle worth fighting, and eventually prevailed. I think if you look at the achievement in terms of equality and diversity generally for gay people, now for trans people, in the past 30 years, it's been really extraordinary. I mean, a great victory. Not everywhere. There's still an awful statistic that 1 in 4 young gay men and women attempt suicide in teenagehood. That's still the case now, and that needs to be worked out. Bullying in schools has been a big issue, but generally speaking, no, it's a different world, a transformed world, and very much for the better. Different story when you look further afield, but we're doing okay here, I think. I am quite often asked to speak about LGBT and diversity issues, partly because the story of that over the past 30 years is also the story of my life, and I've been involved in that fight, both as a sort of activist, but also as someone in a pop band, an out gay pop band. So we fought that good fight. But also now, of course, because I'm a church representative, and the church still, in lots of its in lots of aspects of its life, is still very resistant to the idea of full equality for gay people. So there's a live battle there that's still being fought, which I'm very much involved with. I think people like a good story, and I noticed with me, particularly when word got out and people noticed that I would become ordained, I think that was a story that kind of interested people. How did you get from there to there? And people would ask it all the time. And then gradually that became a more formal thing, and I'd be asked to go and speak to groups. And again, I just noticed that it was a story that seemed to catch people's attention. And then sooner or later, that sort of became professionalised. And I really enjoy talking to people, especially people I don't know, who represent kind of industries that I know nothing about, or lives or experiences I know nothing about. I really enjoy that.